Well, hello everyone. It's very good to be back with you again for our Sunday school sessions. This is going to be a special session. You'll recognize that this is not Jordan sitting with me. I am joined by a special guest today. This is Sarah Claire Smith. We're going to talk a little bit more. She's going to introduce herself a little bit more in a minute. Jordan is enjoying a much needed vacation. He's with some friends this week, so that'll be good. I'm going to be away next week, so Jordan will be on his own or with another special guest next week, so you can look forward to that. As I said, this is Sarah Claire Smith. Sarah Claire and I work together at Providencia West Palm Beach. She is the soul care director for us at Providencia. Sarah Claire and I share a love of music, and she's infinitely more talented than I am. We share a love of Hamilton,
specifically.
And my knowledge of Hamilton might rival Sarah Claire's.
I'm very impressed by his
possibly
knowing of the lyrics. It's very impressive.
Thank you.
Thank
you. We also share a love for the church. And that kind of brings us to our topic for today. We're going to kind of abandon Jordan's and my format for the last few weeks, but Sarah Claire and I are going to have a conversation about church, and we're particularly going to ask the question, why do you go to church? It's a great question to be asking in this moment. I mean, kind of in the COVID moment. We find ourselves doing church much more differently than we ever have before. All of it's virtual. Memorial's been doing pre-recorded things. We've been doing live streaming, but in whatever format, whichever way you slice it, church has been completely different. And it has prompted for me and for some on our staff this sort of question, like, what are we doing? And why are we doing it? And why does everyone show up week to week when we are normally meeting together week to week? So it's a great question to be asking, and the more I think about it myself, the more I kind of, when I break down the elements of church, I find like I could do almost all of these things in another way. If it's like I come to church for Bible study, well, I could get way better Bible studies on YouTube and like a dozen churches' websites than I will get in my local church. If I come to church for music, well, I can go get recordings of music on Spotify or Apple Music that are way better than the live songs that I'm singing in my church. If I'm coming to church for any number of reasons, like those, you can get either different versions or better versions of it at home in front of your laptop. And now we all find ourselves doing church in front of a laptop. So I think it's worth asking the question, why do we want to meet in person? So Sarah Claire, why do you go to church?
Well, funny you ask. A couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I was listening to Brene Brown did she did a homily or something at a church. And she was, I can't even remember if it was like a commencement, or it was something in a church building, and she was commenting on why she goes to church. And she gave these like beautiful reasons, and I think she wrote about it in one of her books. And I was like, that's such an interesting thing. I haven't thought in my adult life, and I work for a church, and I've reintegrated to not being a part of a church in my 20s. I was not a part of a consistent body. I traveled a lot. I lived in New York. I bounced around to lots of churches in New York. I never had this my church feeling. And then when I got to West Palm, I found my church, Providencia. And so since I had really just dove into being a part of church again, I'd never really asked myself that question. So I wrote it down, and I thought, man, it would be cool to ask the people at our church this, because a lot of us have this unconscious movement towards church, maybe because we were raised in the church. Keith and Allison and Kent and I, a couple weeks ago, met with some Memorial people, elders at someone's home. We had dinner, and we asked each other, when did you start going to church? What's the history of that for you? Where did you grow up in the church? Did you grow up Presbyterian? All those questions. And most of us grew up in the church somehow. So there is this rhythm of just you go because you go. my mom like instilled in me like good Christians go to church on Sunday.
Yeah. So when I was young, my family used to go on vacation once a summer, and the thing that we did was like road trip wherever we were going.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't ever fly anywhere. We all piled in the car, and the road trips just got longer as we got older.
Yeah.
So we'd like go to the lake like an hour away when I was really young, and then the summer after my freshman year in college, we drove from Oklahoma City to Buffalo, New York, crossed over at Niagara Falls into Canada, and came back by way of Detroit to Oklahoma City. It was like 6,000 miles or something. It was outrageous.
Wow.
Anyway, when we would go on vacation, that would be kind of the only time, my dad's a pastor, that we were away from church. Sunday morning, the only thing my dad would do is wake up early, either get the phone book out really early in my life, or get on the internet and find a church service that we could go to. And when we were on vacation, we were in a church service.
Totally.
Now, I love that my parents instilled that rhythm in me.
Yes.
But at the same time, I always was like, I gotta step away from this at some point. You know, like just once or twice a year, I'd be happy to spend a Sunday morning not going to church. Yeah, exactly. So I hear that sort of that rhythm of growing up in church. Tell us a little bit more about your story, about yourself, and what's kind of brought you to Providencia now.
Well, I was my whole thing in life before I became a person that works in a church and is a counselor. I'm a counselor now as well. I was in musical theater.
Okay.
I was an actor, a singer, a dancer. That was the only thing that was for me. There was like Jesus, friends, family, theater. Pretty much sums up like my upbringing. And so I was in New York and started to have some movements that happen when you're like 30 and you're looking at your life, or you're 28 and you're like, who am I outside of this thing that I do?
Yeah.
Kind of like sifting through true self, false self, even at that point, just like, what's going on? Started to have some like anxiety issues. Went to therapy, having some like relationship questions too. I was in a relationship at the time, and went to therapy, and I was like, this is a magical thing that's happening. I get to like talk to this person and like really look deeper into what's going on with me and have important conversations. And so then as like time would have it, I decided to go to school to be a therapist and to leave New York, and found myself applying to PBA, found myself coming to go to PBA, didn't know anyone. The relationship I was in ended, very painful, very sad, came here, didn't know anyone. Very lonely season, very like brave season, I would say. As I look back at myself, like, whoa, you did a big thing. You like moved and left everything you knew to come to a place you didn't know, to pursue a new career and whatever. So did that, and found Keith, and then found Providencia, which was almost like the church that my heart always longed would exist, but I didn't believe that it existed. But I mean, I even have pages in my journal when I was in New York moving here, like praying for a community, a spiritual community that wasn't like, that was artsy and weird, because I like need that, you know, we all need like weirdos like us, you know, that like Hamilton and talk about Hamilton in church. I needed that, and I longed for that, and I longed for people who were open-minded and who were like young people too, you know, and then I found it. And it felt like the biggest spiritual gift that God was like, hey girl, this is for you, you know? And I immediately became involved. And then I literally I've like not missed church much since I moved here, because I kept wanting to go. It was this like incredibly safe and enriching space for me. And we started right in that room right there in the fellowship hall. And it just felt like every week God was saying something to me that was for me. And I hadn't felt that way in a long time about church. And I hadn't really, you know, man, I explored I was like at Hillsong, I was at Redeemer in New York, I went to this other kind of in between place called the Apostles. Anyway, so landing here and then falling in love with church again, and the main piece was like falling in love with community and with Jesus in the way that the gospel was being presented here. Because I don't think I think it was in my heart that that's what it was, but the very relational way that church became, because it wasn't just like, it wasn't a show. Because even when I was going to Hillsong, and I don't know, I'm sure some people know what Hillsong is.
Sure.
But I felt very emotionally manipulated at the end. I was like, am I feeling this way, or is this the lights and the church and the very attractive pastor?
Yeah.
And like I was very confused.
Sure.
So, and then I went to a different church, which was Redeemer, which is Tim Keller's church, feeling very like my intellect was very stimulated there, but emotionally I was not, So then kind of finding this place where it felt like my emotions were free to come out.
Yeah.
My intellect and my the theology was being stirred, and I found people that I could live out like spiritual community with. I was like, well, this is great. So,
that's so good.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I got here, and a little bit why church has stayed a part of my rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so interested in what you just said a second ago about the way the gospel was being communicated at Providencia. I'm going to save that for another episode of Sunday School.
Totally.
Because that would be a fascinating conversation.
Yes.
But you said you've done some reflection then over the last year and a half or 2 years on like, why do you go to church? Totally. What were some of the reasons that you wrote down?
Yes. Okay. Well, let me tell you. The first one was I wrote to breathe.
Okay.
So there is this, and I usually I'm leading a lot of Sundays.
Yeah.
But I still will find myself in the back, or I will find myself, even if I'm leading, breathing deeper, because I'm intentionally here to slow down. So I wrote to breathe, to remember our inherently spiritual nature and that God is with us. So one of these images, I don't know if it was Merton or I don't know who said this, but that God is closer to us than our very breath.
Okay.
So when I've now kind of adopted a breathing, whenever I'm doing breathing meditations or something like that, I really attach that to God being close to me. And I found that, and even when Josh Jones was leading us, he would lead us in kind of these contemplative practices a long time ago in church, and I was like, man, this feels right. This feels like a good thing to come every week and do. And I found myself relaxing more. And also, funny enough, I would cry sometimes in church, and not even for a reason, but just because it's there's this release, resting, being able to actually just take a deep breath as I'm sitting here.
I can resonate with those too, because I think for those of us involved in leadership in some way, where we're there an hour and a half early or 3 hours early, whatever it is, we're coming early, we're staying late, we're helping set up and break down, all these things. Finding that space within a church service to breathe, to be reminded that God is near to us, is super important. And I found it before in the hour before we do services. Because I'm not involved in the music ever. I'm involved with the preaching or the confession or whatever it is. And so when I'm there early, the music is sort of being set up and rehearsed and things. And sometimes I'll then have a few minutes before the service starts to sit and breathe, which is really nice.
Yes. Or lay on the pews.
Sure.
Yeah. Where no one can really see you, but you're there.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, one of my other ones, I'll say two in one. To be reminded that there's a bigger picture, that there's more going on, just that it's not just about me and my life. Because I think when you come into church, and this is when we are meeting together, you see your community. So you see that there are other people in this thing with me, and that there's a bigger picture here. And I think a lot of even, because we are very city oriented, and we're trying to bring our past, we're trying to bring our stories, and we're also trying to build something. So there's just this zoom out moment that happens where I'm seeing that there's a bigger picture going on. It takes me out of myself, because clearly I can get very egocentric. But that it says, hey, you're not alone. There's other people that are having a life other than you, and there's a bigger thing going on, and we're a part of it.
So two things jump out at me on that. For me, one of my reasons for coming to church is to kind of experience the encouragement of the community.
Totally.
You kind of come in and you we're in this together. We've all come here for a reason. We're all in different places, but we've joined together to sing these songs in praise to God, to be reminded that God is near to us, all these things. So that sort of communal encouragement is a huge thing for me. And then one of the things that I have missed so I think deeply during these live stream COVID pre-recorded services is that I think one of the reasons I come to church is that it's a beautiful embodiment of weeping with those who weep and rejoicing with those who rejoice.
Yes.
So in the midst of like all the racial conversations we've been having about racial justice and our society and our church and like those kinds of conversations that we've been having, we've been reminded over and over to weep with those who are weeping and rejoice with those who are rejoicing. I think we can do that at distance with people that we don't know personally, with even groups of people that we don't know personally. But doing that with a community that you do know personally has a profound effect on us. And I'm always reminded that there have been Sundays where I've come together with my group of believers that I call church, when I'm rejoicing and there are a bunch of other people who are weeping, or I'm weeping and there are a bunch of other people who are rejoicing, and to have those other people empathize with me and take on that weeping or rejoicing that I'm experiencing and feeling, and for me to try to do that for other people as well. That's where I feel like church is really happening. And
so good.
On the live streams and stuff, I'm just like I'm missing that entirely. There's just no I don't know about people's lives as much. I'm keeping up with as many people as I can, but it just inherently I'm not seeing them all. And so I miss that a lot.
Totally. Yes. And it's that the other thing I was gonna say next is the passing of the peace. And it's like you're not able to, like, you can like send a text, but when you're human to human and you're saying, you're like intentionally, and we used to do the like, you know, shake someone's hand or something.
Peace of Christ be with you.
Yeah, right. So we don't really do that, but it happened, or we don't do that because someone says to do that, but you do that before the service, and you do that after the service, and you walk beside someone to take communion. And it's just this very, you notice other people, and because you're in spiritual community with them, which is another one of my reasons that I come to church, is because I need spiritual community. I want spiritual, I want people and friendships around me that are not just on the surface. And I think that spiritual word is not just like that they believe the exact same things that I believe, but that we are on a spiritual journey, and like because every one of us are here, we're acknowledging that we know that, and that we need help in it, because it's hard to be on our own in the spiritual journey. And so that passing of the peace, and then the other part of the like connection with people is the declaring of freedom. Because freedom is a big thing for me for whatever reason. Like I'm an Enneagram 7. I don't know why. I honestly still, it's like freedom is just a theme for me, in healthy ways and not healthy ways. Sure. Probably. But the declaration of like that Jesus has set us free and that we are free indeed. Like something about that is very good for my brain to be reminded of, and then to be able to declare onto others. And so I feel like in preaching the word, or in sharing the gospel, or in just being together, like the reminder and the declaring of like, you are free. You know, that's like, so there's the passing of the peace and the declaration of freedom that feels important about the gathering. And that connects to what we're talking about as well, in terms of like sometimes we have to declare freedom for other people, or we need someone else to declare it for us. Like,
so
to remind you you're free,
and
then you can remind me when I'm not. And that's that scripture of like, don't forget to gather together to stir each other on. Right. And then the two scriptures that I thought about with this topic is that one, and then when two or more are gathered together, there I am also. And that is that thin space feeling. Where you're like, I know that something else is happening right now. I can't explain it, but I have chill bumps, maybe I have tears, maybe something moves me, and I'm like, yes, preacher, preach. You know, when you just feel that there's like another thing that's like moving right by you, that you can't see and you don't really understand, but that mysterious thing that is like the Spirit of God is like there. And I want that. I like that. So that thin space is very attractive, and I think church can, not always. You can have it, like you were saying earlier, you can have a thin space on the beach. You can have a thin space reading a book in your house. You can have a thin space at dinner with your partner. But I think the idea of thin space in a church gathering is really cool.
And I do think there is something about gathering in a space that has been designated as sacred, I don't always love those distinctions,
Right.
sacred and secular,
Totally.
but in terms of like church
Intentional.
buildings, in particular, sanctuaries that have been kind of designated, this is where a church service happens, this is where people gather to pray, to preach, to proclaim, like all these things. There's something about that space being designated as sacred that tends to foster that kind of thin space. I know that's not true for everyone. For some people, sacred space has been a place of trauma for them. So we want to recognize that. But I do think there is a generally positive thing about sacred space that can foster those sorts of moments.
The other, I hadn't thought about this until you just said that, but the other thing that I love about our church, Providencia, is that I feel like we are actively working to redeem what church can be, because church has been very harmful for a lot of people. It's been harmful for me, like for sure. But I think that there's something that can happen when you say we're going to be aware of what it can be, in the negative and in the traumatic and in the manipulative or controlling, and we're going to work very hard to move away from that so that people can redeem their relationship with church and their relationship with Jesus, with God, which is the bigger point, But, I think we do have a lot of people, and myself included, like that it's very rare that you feel safe to deconstruct or reconstruct or have hard conversations about your faith in a church. But I think that's the place that could be a perfect place to do it if we were open to that. So making church not like safe's not the word, but open or comforting or non-threatening or just aware,
That's so good. Were there any more on your list? Were there any more reasons we haven't talked about?
Let's refer to remember, so kind of hearkening to communion, like what we do is we remember what was done for us on the cross and the resurrection, so that's something. And then like basically the last ones are kind of the liturgy, so to confess, to praise, to give thanks, and to remember communion. So I think liturgy is such a beautiful thing, and it's a rhythm that, as it's modeled in church, what it can be in our lives, I think. And if we can take the liturgy out of just the hour on Sunday and put it into our actual lives, like that would be really cool. So, but I there's very few liturgies that I knew about consciously outside of church. So what I'm trying to learn is how to take the liturgy that is offered to me in the, and being invited into worship, the singing of praise, or like singing to God, the confession of our sins, the assurance of the good news, and then the preaching of the word, and then the remembering of why we're even here, and then the benediction. It's just like nice. I like that. So those are the last kind of reasons of why church seems worth attending.
No, that's so good. I think for me, as I've been reflecting on this question during COVID, I keep coming back to, for some reasons that some of which I can name and some of which I can't name, the live streams and the like watching church on a computer screen of one sort or another, laptop or whatever it is, has not been life-giving to me. I really hope that it has been for some people, recording these things. I don't think it's useless. But I found it to be, maybe I should say, it's been less life-giving. There's something about like being by yourself in front of a laptop that isn't church. That's kind of one place I've had to come to. And then to say, okay, so what is it about? Well, it's mostly communal things. Which brings us to communion. It brings us to passing the peace. It brings us to the mutual encouragement we get when we're with other people, all of which are really beautiful. And I think I've just had to get to the place in the last 4 months where I'm like, it's okay to not enjoy, it's okay to not love church the way we're doing it right now. We all know it's not ideal. I really hope that the things that we're doing have been beneficial for some people, and I have found some of them to be beneficial and life-giving to me. But I really want to get back to being with people on a regular rhythm, in a sort of Sabbath sacred context, to be doing church.
Absolutely. And I think what could be cool is that from this time we become more consciously aware of our motivations. That we become more conscious attenders of church, instead of like my grandmother would say rote. She would say like, don't just do things by rote.
Right.
Like do them because you love them, or because she was a music teacher. So she'd be like, don't just play out of memory, like play out of passion.
Yeah.
So it's like, so we don't become rote attenders of church, but that there's actually conscious awareness of why we're doing this.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Drew.
Thank you, all of you, for watching. We'd love to hear your feedback, maybe even your answers to the question, why do you
miss?
Come to church? Yeah,
That's
what do you miss?
What do you miss about church? Yeah.
Definitely. Jordan will be back next week, maybe with a special guest, maybe on his own. But look forward to another video from Jordan next week. Bye.
I will pass our peace to you.